Hey, what's up? I'm Guy.
I'm John.
It's our YouTube channel. Subscribe to this channel. Give this video a like.
Check out the podcast below in the description. Do it now.
Big national championship game. Uh, Player with the most to gain, I think, is Justin Fields. We'll talk about Mac Jones as the draft season comes along. But for Fields, and I started thinking about this because we talked to Louis Riddick the other day about kind of the back and forth with Fields and Zach Wilson. You think about Deshaun. I think of two players when I think about helping your draft stock off of Nick Saban. I think of Deshaun Watson, and you could argue his draft stock didn't get helped as much as it should have.
I don't know.
And I think of
That was crazy looking back. Like, how did he not?
Dabo, remember,
He
was
probably should've
pounding the
gone one.
table. Dabo was saying this is insane. But then I really think of Johnny Manziel, who I think his NFL prospects
Put him on the map.
were really helped by how he played against Nick. Nick Saban couldn't slow him down. So I think for Fields, this is a big. Now this is supposed to be a shootout, and the over under 75. So maybe it's just the way the game is played, and maybe you don't get a ton of credit. But I think Fields got a lot of credit for the way he played against Clemson, and he'll get double the credit if he does the same thing against Alabama.
I think the Manziel stat was the only guy to throw 400 yards back-to-back games or back-to-back seasons against a Nick Saban coach team was Drew Brees at Purdue against his Michigan State teams, then Johnny at Texas A&M against Alabama. Now, the one thing this year is their defense. Like when Deshaun did it to him, looking back, like that team was loaded with the Minka Fitzpatricks and all those defensive linemen. You're right. Deshaun Watson did not get enough credit for what he did. I wonder if Justin Fields would just get credit for just beating Nick Saban. Because the way it gets talked about in a draft room, you just go, he beat Alabama, right? Right now, if you're sitting in a draft room talking about Justin Fields, you're going, he just beat Dabo Swinney and Brett Venables. Kicked their ass. You're saying that to your general manager. You're saying that to your offensive coordinator. You're saying that to whoever. He just kicked the shit out of the highest paid coach in the country, the best team. And if he does it against Saban, it won't be that like Saban has this historic SEC defense, because he doesn't. They haven't been very good.
Well, but they've only given up more than 30 points twice this year.
Let me rephrase. Haven't been very good relative, I think, to the way we thought about kind of their dynasty. They become kind of more of an offensive team than a defense, but they're still good on defense. And I'm sure, what do you think? Of their 11 starters, 5 make rosters in the next couple
why
of years?
limit it
right?
to starters?
Yeah. Well, if I factor in backups and true freshmen that aren't playing, it's way more.
I mean, they gave up 48 to Ole Miss. You and I remember that game because we bet Alabama to cover like 21 points. And they allowed 46 to Florida. That game was 52-46 in the SEC
It
title
was,
game.
remember, a blowout, and they scored a bunch of points in the second half.
But other than that, now you could argue some of these teams were just down. Tennessee 17, or not good. Mississippi State, remember that game, 41-0. Kentucky,
was the Iron Bowl?
Okay, 3 points. 42-13 was the Iron Bowl. LSU again down, but part of the reason they're
they
down is
kicked
because
Florida's
Alabama
ass
kicking
when
their
they
butt.
had to. I mean, they took it to them earlier.
Notre Dame
in that
14
Florida
points.
game. I thought.
Yeah, look,
Yeah,
here's the story.
you're
If
right.
Justin Fields scores, if Ohio State scores over 30 points and they've got a chance to win the game, then, I mean, Justin Fields probably looks really good and
Yeah, I
should
think if
get the
Justin
credit for it.
I think if Justin Fields wins this game and just is viewed as a guy, regardless what a stat sheet is, that just was a major part why they upset Alabama, and it'd be a big upset, right? Almost a 10-point underdog in a national championship, and they're Ohio State. Like, you don't see that very often. Like, it takes an Alabama to do that. It would be one of, like, I think people in these draft rooms would go, we overthought it with Deshaun Watson. He was at Clemson, what he did to Saban, and what he did on those back-to-back years in the playoffs. Look at what this kid just did. Clemson, Alabama, back-to-back weeks as huge underdogs in both, and especially if he's the best player on the field, I think he would basically solidify himself as the number 2 overall pick. Don't you? Like, I just don't see what Zach Wilson would have if he's fantastic in this game that could hold a candle. I just know the way these draft rooms work. Now, it's about more than that, what's personal workouts and personal interactions. But let's just say all those things are equal.
Well, it'd be very
You can't argue that
Tua-ish.
Zach Wilson has anything.
It'd be very Tua versus Herbert-ish, right?
True, but the difference with this guy, best athlete on the field, or one of them, right? He's got a bigger arm. Like, this guy, from his physical skills, very
for
Tua-ish.
sure.
And
Yeah.
This guy has physical skills.
Yeah, I'm just saying it would be like it got to the point with Tua where it was like nobody even dared think you could take Herbert over him, at least publicly. It was so easy to go with Tua, and if you're a team, it was really easy to go with Tua. Just because it's like, look at what he's done. How could you not take this guy over that guy? I mean, he's done it year after year after year at Alabama. Come on, this is great, right? From that standpoint, I'm not saying it wouldn't be the right pick. I'm just saying it would make it a lot easier to stomach it.
I think the difference is looking back, and it's easy to do. Hindsight's 2020. After Justin Herbert, I don't know, became the greatest rookie quarterback in the history of the league. Looking back, Justin Herbert's bigger, faster, stronger, bigger arm.
Yeah.
Justin Fields is all those things to Zach Wilson, right? Like he is the superior. I mean, he's just a blue chipper. You know, he's 6'4". He got next to Trevor Lawrence, like they hugged after the game, and I posted a funny picture or something about it on a DM. I can't remember. And someone DM'd me, and I hadn't even thought about it. They're like, wow, I didn't realize Fields was that tall. Because, you know, part of Trevor Lawrence is he's like basically 6'5". He's huge. Mm-hmm. Justin Fields is like 6'3.5". Justin Fields is not like this 6'1" elite athlete. He's a big time, like to me, he's a little Herbert-ish with more of the resume, right? Like his team was better. He had bigger games. He's the 5-star version of that. Like where Herbert was a little under-recruited, but then he became this like blue chip athlete. Fields was like that in high school and just carried it through. Where it was clear, like once you started watching Herbert, that he had all those things. And it was just different. Like this guy was in a position to win because his team was good too. Like Herbert's team wasn't like these teams.
Right.
And that's where, to me, the Tua advantage is. But you also have to be careful because you bring up, right when you bring that up, if I was running the draft room, I'd be like, well, you have a good point. Like what we saw Zach Wilson in a vacuum, like he didn't control his schedule. He just played who he played, and he was an elite, and he was awesome. That's where I just think the conversation between these two guys for the number 2 pick is going to be just consistently pretty intense.
Well, it doesn't mean it's right, but I to your point, it's like if he looks great in this game, it's just going to be really
I feel
tough.
more comfortable.
You'd feel so much more comfortable arguing for him because part of this depends on, you know, the risk mitigation desires of whoever's picking him. Like, are you picking him going, I'm just picking the guy I think. I don't care at all about how much, you know, whether or not I can cover my ass later. If this one doesn't work out, everyone would defend it, you know.
But even if we had them both as equals, I'd just go, listen, how can this guy top? One, he gets hurt in the Clemson game, wills his way through it, throws the 6 touchdowns. And then as he's banged up 7-8 days later, knocks off Saban in Alabama. Like what else? It's legendary stuff.
Yeah, it is.
Now and the pushback is that legendary stuff hasn't historically always carried over, right? Deshaun Watson's actually an outlier of a guy that crushed it in college at the highest level. Like a lot of times they've been Leinart, Heupel, Tebow. You know, you just start listing the all-time greats, and sometimes they're just Mariota had, you know, Jameis. It doesn't. That's where I have to be careful. It's not just a 1-for-1 translation. Like it's like you can't dominate there, it works.
Well, it's classic. Like cool.
It's like Khalil Mack. He could only play who he played. Yeah, he's been fine.
Well, not sometimes. Like if we went to every major leaguer and looked at their little league stats, I bet a lot of them just played on the All-Star team, hit a bunch of home runs. But we also know that the kid that hits 5 home runs in little league doesn't necessarily. He might just have matured early and already have sideburns when he's 11, right? You don't. Sometimes colleges, you've reached your peak as a senior, and sometimes it's, well, you're going to be 25 in 4 years and think how much better you're going to be. That's where it gets difficult, especially when the development has to be where it's a development you can't see. Like there's no question sometimes with these guys physically, like Leinart physically, his arm was not. He just didn't have a big arm.
Neither
but there have been plenty of guys that do and still.
But sometimes like
out.
Cam, he has the 1 year at Auburn, you know, national championship, right?
Yeah.
Where you go, yeah, well, he's 6'5". He can run a 4.5. He can throw it back then 90 yards. It's like, yeah, this guy would just be whether he had won 5 games in college would have been a big time NFL prospect. And then you see it. So it's like your physical skills, and that's where I go with Justin Fields. He's got a big-time arm. You saw some of those balls he threw last week. I mean, we're traveling like 60, 70 yards in the air.
The late deep ball he threw was ridiculous.
He's a big-time athlete. He's tall. He's at a blue chip, like, oh, he's a 5-star guy. People eat that shit up. Then
High-level football
Ohio
character.
State. Yeah, I think he's got a lot of momentum of just what you look for. He's a blue chip type, what you look for in the NFL. He's improved, and he's doing it at the highest level. Because Burrow would be an example. We looked, and we thought it couldn't be that easy. And we see him in the pros. We're like, God, this guy's going to be pretty damn good.
Yeah.
You know? It's hard. It's every guy is their own entity is something I learned a long time ago. And I've learned it since we've just been talking about players. You got to be careful about not. It does feel, though, Justin Fields is more Cam, Burrow. I don't know if he's a Pro Bowl or whatever, but to me, he leans more that than the Tebows of the Leinarts, right?
Yeah.
Mariota. Like, he's way more physically gifted than Mariota as a thrower.
I agree.